My name is Dante and this is Story Hub. Right now I have a lot of problems going on with my mother-in-law on top of them. I'm fighting cancer for the second time in my life. I was first diagnosed when I was 14, fought it and won. I lived a happy and peaceful life until recently when I had my health checked for job necessities and surprise. I'm 30 years old and I've cancer again. This is secondary cancer, a different organ, nothing to do with the first one. Fortunately, stage 2 only. However, my oncologist warned that it's aggressive, grows and spreads fast, and I could be stage 3 or more in a short period of time, so we had to act fast. Hearing that you have cancer is always devastating, but to me, it feels like something wants me dead very much. I was distraught that I'll have to go through this again. It's a very hard fight, both physically and mentally. Any current or former cancer patient will agree on that. I had surgery and now it's time for chemotherapy. The doctors decided on oral chemo that I can take at home and only have to go to a hospital to do blood tests and scans every few weeks, which is very good. I wouldn't have the strength to go there every day. I'm on sick leave from work now, and because of the treatment, I'm quite weak. I've lost a lot of weight. Before that, my wife and we both had an equal share of household chores. Some days I feel better than others. However, directly after every receipt of chemo, even the simplest chores are often a physical impossibility for me. I try to do as much as I can, but my wife has been amazing. She doesn't care at all that I don't help around the house as much as I did. She's like, your only obligation now is not to die. The other day my mother-in-law came over to visit. She knew about my diagnosis. I was on the couch reading and my wife was doing something around the house. My mother-in-law walked over to me and was like, look at that. Lying on that couch as if you're on the beach. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? A grown man and lying down in the middle of the day while your poor wife is working as a slave. I said, I just did chemo. I have a headache. I'm nauseous. I don't feel good. She was like, a young man like you and cannot beat some silly cancer. You cannot cure yourself with those chemicals. Nature products only. Later that day my mother-in-law was talking to my wife in the kitchen. I didn't mean to listen, but I heard their conversation anyway. Mother-in-law was like, you really shouldn't let him take that poison he's taking or he will die. It's poison, otherwise he wouldn't feel so bad. Doctors nowadays are totally stupid. You should seek herbal treatments instead. As all of that came from someone without any medical education and tries to be smarter than she actually is. My wife shut her up quickly and told her to stay away from things she understands nothing about. The next day I was going to take my chemo, as I'm scheduled. I have to take it once a day and I prefer to do it in the morning because then I feel better in the evening and I can sleep better. But, as I walked into the bathroom and opened the cabinet, there was no trace of my chemo bottles. They were gone, completely. I asked my wife if she moved them by any chance and she said no. We looked around but realized it's pointless because they couldn't fall out of the cabinet. And there's also no need to hide the chemo. We don't have children or pets who could accidentally swallow it. Then my wife remembered that just before leaving the day before, mother-in-law asked to use the bathroom. She could have easily taken the bottles with her, considering her words about the toxicity of chemo. My wife turned into a dragon. She was literally almost spitting fire as she got dressed and stormed out to go to mother-in-law's house. I had never seen her so mad before. She came back a half an hour or so later and told me that she demanded my medication from my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law admitted she took my chemo indeed, and when she left our house, she threw it out. Obviously, it's gone. We cannot search through every garbage bin in the city, but just the fact that she did it blew my mind. My wife and mother-in-law had a huge argument and my mother-in-law really thinks she did me a favor. She was like, don't you see he's dying? Don't you see how fragile he's become? It's not cancer that's killing him, it's those pills. I got rid of them. I saved your husband and that's how you thank me, by insulting me. Better go and buy him some herbal teas. Because of my mother-in-law, I missed a dose of chemo, which is very bad, and I had to see my oncologist immediately. When I told him I needed more chemo, he was surprised and said, what happened to the chemo I gave you a short time ago? You couldn't have used it all already. And I was like, well, you see, doctor, my mother-in-law stole my chemo. He looked totally baffled, as if the fact that someone would steal someone else's chemo is ridiculously stupid. He prescribed me new bottles of chemo and a new schedule on how I'm supposed to take it, and now I keep it in a cabinet with a lock. Even though my wife swore to me, my mother-in-law will never set foot in our house again. You're an idiot. While the crazy mother-in-law is wrong about curing cancer by natural means, it feels like you are overly milking the cancer stick and using it to make those around you care for you. The mother-in-law is by no means a good person, but you have to respect the fact that she loves her daughter. Not an idiot. Yeah, press charges so that she can learn her lesson before she actually kills someone. God, that's so terrible. That woman is freaking vile. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I wish you a quick recovery. Not an idiot. Oh my god, I'm so sorry you have to waste energy on this dumb shot when you need energy for healing. Big hugs and wishing you a speedy recovery. May that woman never speak to you ever again. Not an idiot. Calling someone lazy because they have cancer. That's fucked up. When she gets sick, make sure to tell her that she's lazy. Better yet, do it when she has broken a leg or hip. Maybe then we remember how dumb she is. I have fibromyalgia, so some days are worse than others. While my family doesn't understand and probably never will unless they get it too, they're not this bad. When you don't have the ability to do things you used to physically, no one seems to understand that or the mental aspect of it. Hope you get better soon. Now for the next story. The last few months have been rough. Near the end of last year, we lost the house to a freak accident. We lost almost everything we owned. It's just been a really stressful time for my little family of 4. We were out for a school recital when we received the call from a neighbor, and we returned to find the house in flames. The fire department tried to save what they could, but the damage was really bad. We ended up selling the property and moving altogether because the repairs amounted to essentially rebuilding the house. I have been married for 10 years and my mother-in-law has never liked me. I still didn't expect her to act the way she did during this time. I always believed that even if she didn't like me, she'd help me in a time of need because I was the mother of her 2 grandsons and the wife of her son, and I made them happy. I was wrong. On the night of the accident, we needed a place to stay temporarily, at least until we could have a few moments to breathe and get our bearings. My husband suggested we stay with his mother for the night. It was late and it made the most sense to us both. We drove over to the house. My boys were half asleep in the backseat and we left them in the car when we went to speak to mother-in-law to explain what was going on. She was very sympathetic at first and said she had no problem with my husband and my son staying, but I would have to make other arrangements. My husband lost it with her and began to yell that she was being unreasonable, and she refused to budge. In her words, I wasn't true family and she'd never blessed our marriage in the first place, so I was not her responsibility. We left and spent the night in our car, and we got a motel the next day. She began calling and inviting us over to stay again, and she said that she'd graciously permit me to stay in the garage for a few days. Again, we didn't take her up on the offer and my husband told her that she was being very disrespectful. My mother-in-law got very angry in response and said that we were spitting on her generosity. She then offered to keep the boys so that they wouldn't need to stay in a motel while we put our lives back in order. Again, we rejected her offer. We heard nothing from her for a few days until we learned that she had been bad-mouthing me to people. She was claiming that I was tearing the family apart in this time of need with my grudges. From her point of view, she'd opened her house to us in an instant and I'd turned her down and forced my husband's sons to live in a cheap motel because I didn't like her. My husband set the record straight, but my mother-in-law did not ease up. She made an official complaint to the fire department claiming that I had caused the accident purposefully to destroy the house and force the current situation. She said that I was money hungry and had designs on her house, and this was all part of my plan to steal her house from under her. I was taken in for questioning and I understand why due to the nature of the allegations, but I was cleared off everything as the investigation proved it was an accident, and there was no way someone could deliberately cause the accident. She later showed up to the house while we were going through it to see what could be salvaged, and she made disparaging comments about how we should not be upset as these were just things. Yes, they were things. I'm not upset about the stove and the couch and the bed. I'm upset about the arts and crafts projects my sons made for Mother's Day every year. I'm upset about family heirlooms that are irreplaceable. I'm upset about the memories that were lost. The house was a fixer-upper when we bought it and we did a lot of the restoration ourselves. We had professionals handle things like the wiring, but we did the painting and the sanding and whatever we could to save money. My youngest son had a gaming console that he owned, which had been left at her house before the accident. They'd been over for a weekend with their father and had taken the console to keep them occupied. Mother-in-law stated she didn't have it, and we must have taken it back. My son argued with her that he'd had a conversation with her about leaving it there for the week so his cousin could use it while visiting. She gaslit him to the point of frustrated tears and kept saying we'd taken it back and it had probably been lost in the accident. The truth came out from others that my mother-in-law had given it away after we'd refused her initial offer of hospitality. The shining ray of light through all this has been that this is the straw that broke the camel's back for my husband. We all went no contact after these incidents and a few more, and we cut contact with her shortly before moving to our new place. She has been trying to get our address from family members, but she hasn't had any luck just yet. My husband made it clear that he'd have no problem cutting off anyone else in the family who gave her our address or contact information. If she can't support us when we're at our worst, she doesn't deserve to be there when we're at our best. Not an idiot. Hell, does your mother-in-law have some sort of mental illness? Let me see you after I treated you like shit. Why would she think you wanted to see her ever again, not just for turning you down in your time of need but giving away your son's games console? Not an idiot. What is it about house fires and JNMILs? When my home burnt, I was 10. My mom's mother-in-law turned the entire event into her tragedy, after first denying she even had a son that lived in our town. Then, she offered to let my parents borrow 2 rollaway beds that she'd borrowed from my mother. She came back for them 6 days later. She needed them because of visitors. This was the last time my mom spoke to her. She said screw it, gave her beds to my grandmother, and made her leave. This is part of the tipping stone that leads to our no contact as well. One of my last memories of my grandmother was her taking away our beds, after we'd literally lost everything. I mean, even my brother and my dog Danny Boy died in the fire, and she couldn't. Now for the next story. I had a baby, like you do. It doesn't feel like it was terribly long ago, but my kid is over 10, so things have definitely changed since then. Back in those days, we didn't have fancy video baby monitors or breathing sensors or any of the amazing fancy things you new moms get these days. We had a simple baby monitor. The base was in the baby's room and the receiver was either in our bedroom or the living room, wherever we were. It was a pretty good monitor. You could definitely hear what was going on in the baby's room. And so our story begins. My parents were visiting. I didn't know what a just know was at that time. I knew my biological father was abusive, hence the restraining orders. But my mom was so much better than him, I didn't ever think to question what she said. Until I became a mother. Then all bets were off. I lost my first baby and nobody was going to do anything wrong when my son was born. His health and safety came first. Anyway, my mom and stepfather were visiting. My mother had some opinions about our parenting decisions. Things had changed since the 70s. Who would have thought? But kept them mostly to herself. Until my aunt called her. We were all in the living room and so she took herself into the baby's room to sit in the rocker and chat. And trash my parenting. And so we sat in the living room, my husband and I don't remember where my stepfather was, and heard her make fun of me and my choice of everything, and how I was overprotective and this and that. It lasted a good 20 minutes. Then she came back, completely oblivious to the fact that we'd heard the whole thing. A lifetime of rug sweeping training kicked in and I pretended nothing had happened. More time passed on the visit. She played with the baby, I fed him, and my stepfather came back from probably Home Depot. And we were all in the living room when the baby had a blowout. And I took the baby to his room to change the baby and get the blowout damage under control. And while we were in there, we were very aware that anything we said would be heard over the baby monitor in the living room. Both of my parents would hear anything we said. I can't remember the specifics of what we said, but I know it was in reference to some suggestions my mother had made that were out of date or wouldn't work for us. We weren't mean or rude, just matter of fact about how it wouldn't work. When the baby was cleaned up, we went back to the living room and were greeted with the biggest cat caught the canary smirk on my mother's face. We sat down and she said, "You should be careful what you say in the room with the baby monitor." And y'all, that new mom's spine showed up. Yes, I said. We learned that when you were on the phone with Aunt, the smirk froze and then in an instant turned to horror. Horror because her daughter dared talk back to her. Horror because she had been robbed of the gloating that she was so certain she was about to enjoy. But mainly horror because she had been sitting there stewing. And in her mind, she had worked herself up into believing that being overheard on the baby monitor was shameful. And anyone who was overheard saying anything unflattering on the monitor deserved to be embarrassed and ashamed. So with that designated as the proper response in her mind, now that she had been caught out for that very thing, she had to be embarrassed and ashamed. And it was awesome. My stepfather chuckled and they left shortly after. Not an idiot. This is beautiful and perfect. Good job you. That was just absolutely delicious to read. 10/10 with Schadenfreude again. As an aside, I am so sorry for the loss of your first child. I completely understand why you'd be protective of your, now a bit grown, baby. We had a miscarriage and are still trying. I had to cut my mom out of our lives for her bullshit before the loss, and I'm not holding my breath that she'll be any different with a living child. Ah bless, Karma's a butch. Just when she thought she had you in a hole, she missed realizing that she was buried below your feet. Your story made my heart smile. Yay for you. I hope your spine is adamantium hard now.